Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight Sexy Boy Roy, aka R. Jacob Honeybrook.
Please keep it coming. Keep it coming.
I
How you
think
doing
people are
tonight,
going to be
brother?
lining up for miles for you with a
Oh my
nickname
god.
like that.
Right? Especially the hot chicks. Get over it.
So first, I got to ask though, where'd you get your pen name, R. Jacob Honeybrook? I mean, you could tell me where Sexy Boy Roy came from as well, but I could just tell by looking at you, I know where that came from.
Right here. Sexy Boy Roy was actually my backyard wrestling name in high school. And I wasn't that sexy back then. I was once a fat kid, and then I was a twig, so there was not really a whole lot of sexiness going on there. And then I just carried that into my adult life. Like, why not? As far as our Jacob Honeybrook goes, that was man. When I started this thing, I basically thought it was just going to be a joke and go nowhere. And then 5 years later, here we are. Lo and behold, it went somewhere. So shit
Well, that's
happens.
funny because I feel like a lot of authors have the opposite. They're like, oh man, I'm going to be famous. And then we all just end up sucking. So I'm glad you got the right end of the stick on that one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I went into this expecting to suck, and it turns out people actually dig what I do. So score one for the home team.
Okay.
Honeybrook came when I was working around Philly. I would have to drive in through terrible traffic every day, and I'd always pass a sign for Honeybrook exit, and it was almost like it was taunting me as I was on my way into hell. Like, hey, doesn't this town sound nice and pleasant and everything? So I was like, if I ever do something creative, whatever, I'm gonna use that and show this job and show this commute what's up. So lo and behold, it just became a part of my last name. As far as the R Jacob, I have no idea. I say the R stands for Roy. The J is whatever you want to make of it. It could be Juice, it could be Jeezy, whatever you want.
Nice. Okay, cool. So I also have to ask, what's up with the Four Locos? Are you just like sponsored by them? You just love Four Locos? You carry a little bit of that from your high school, college life into your adulthood? Like, what's that?
I think it's just because I hate my liver, to be honest. But man, I don't know. It's oh man, it's just like kind of a joke at this point. Like I get them because instead of getting like a 18 pack of beer or whatever, bunch of calories in that, you drink like 15 beers, you're all bloated and shit. You drink two Four Locos, man, you're on the floor by the end of the night. So it's like it's cheap, it gets you fucked up quick, and they're just fun to chug and put on camera. But I'll tell you what, I did recently hit up Four Loco, and I was like, hey, I'm powered by Four Locos and Pit Viper sunglasses. You guys want to sponsor me yet? So we'll see what they say.
Nice. Yeah, well, I do love beer, and I don't think I hate my liver enough to drink Four Locos anymore, though. I almost wonder if a 16 pack isn't as bad as a couple Four Locos.
Four Locos are probably worse, man. It tastes like you're drinking straight ethanol.
Yeah. Awesome. So I love your larger than life persona. I follow you on Instagram. I every time you post something, I'm like, I got to see what Sexy Boy Roy is saying next. So, um, but you're a little bit more mild mannered now. You can feel free to tune it up if you'd like. But what's your real persona? Like where are you actually in real life, and where are you from, and give me your whole background, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that persona. I am a huge pro wrestling fan. I have been since I was a kid. Like I was born, we were watching wrestling and horror movies, and I always wanted to be a pro wrestler. Like some authors, they're like, when I was a kid, I dreamt about being an author and I stayed up late reading books. Like, no, I always wanted to be a pro wrestler. I'd watch it every week, do the moves on my friends. My brother would hit me with Stone Cold Stunners out of nowhere. Um, but one thing that they always say in pro wrestling is that the best characters are just your persona, but just cranked up to 11. So where that kind of online persona comes from, the whole "Hey, how you doing?" New York accent, Philadelphia, that that comes out because man, when I did my first social media video, I don't know if I was nervous or talking fast, but the whole time, like my Italian American accent just like really came out. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but there's something to it. And I ran with that. And I have a good friend from the Bronx. I know how he talks, so I incorporate some of his stuff in there. But yeah, by and large, that's just me, like in the shit that goes on in my brain, and then I just blow it out on camera in more ways than one. But but no, I mean, who I am, what I like to do. When I'm not writing, I like to, sit down and read if I have time. Uh, Play guitar, go to the gym. One of my jobs is being a personal trainer, so I'm very avid about fitness and everything. So yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, one thing I've noticed when talking to authors is that like a lot of them have a lot of different sides. So you have this, Guido. Is that offensive if I say Guido? Like I don't know.
I mean, I say it, but I'm Italian, so it doesn't bother me.
I'm half
I'm a Guido
Italian. I
fuck.
can kind of say it. So you got this
Guido
side, you
who,
then you got
whatever.
the author side, the reader side, and the personal trainer side. I have like my nerd side. Like I played rugby for many years. I got my author side. Like everybody's got all these different sides. I think it helps us bring realistic characters to life. So would you say that you have a lot of yourself in a lot of your characters, or you just like make shit up as you go?
In my books,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely a lot of me in those characters. I always feel like each character is a different piece of me. Like I've been told there's a lot of facets to me. Somebody once said I'm like an onion. I didn't know whether that meant I stunk or that there's a couple layers to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, kind of like you, I have my macho badass Guido side, and that's like who I am when I'm at the gym training people, working private security, whatever. But then I also have this more like deep musical artistic side, and it's weird because while it's cool to fit into different areas in life, it almost makes you feel like a little bit of an outsider because I've always felt like I'm too artsy and musical and all that stuff to be like a straight meathead jock, but I'm also too writer, music, whatever, to be a total meathead jock. So it's like I'm kind of in this in between area, and that's where I've always felt like I've landed.
Yeah, no, 100%. Me too. Like, I totally get that. And I think it can just help us appeal to larger audiences. And I think a lot of people that you wouldn't peg as like book nerds really do like escaping to other fantasy universes, or in your case, horror, which we're going to get into in a little bit. But first, when I was checking out on Amazon, you mentioned that you are a former journalist, and what did you say? You with true life horror stories. So tell me a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about that experience and what made you switch from journalism to authoring.
Yeah, so in journalism, man, you just write about the most horrible shit every day: car wrecks, murders, any kind of crime scenes you can think of. And it's a lot of stress in that business, especially on the TV side, because when you're doing live television, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So there's really a lot of stress there, um, and not a whole lot of payoff for it. So I did the journalism thing. There's a lot of just horrific shit you see every day. Some of the worst stuff in journalism that we see doesn't even get aired. So I can remember getting police reports about just this awful child abuse story that we wouldn't run because we don't want to, you know, give clues as to who that victim is. So it's like, yeah, this is a terrible story. Yeah, this guy deserves to be in jail for life, but we can't really run it because, if you say this person's father did whatever to him, now you're basically calling out the victim. And those are really the stories that stuck with me the most, the ones that we can't air that are actually too graphic for the news. And that was pretty eye opening. But going from there, for some reason, every journalist who gets good at that eventually makes their way into PR and marketing, which is what I did. And again, like I talked about going to that corporate job every day, man, I was just like, this can't be all there is to life. I would sit in traffic, in Philadelphia traffic every day for an hour, go to a job I hated for 9 hours, sit in Philadelphia traffic on the way home for another hour. And I'm just thinking, man, if this is all there is to life, is just this, there's got to be something more. Otherwise, what's the point? Like, this isn't living. So I started thinking, and people in journalism had told me I was good at writing, some of them hot, which helped. And one day I was just being miserable around my apartment, and I was like, well, people tell me I'm good at writing. I've always enjoyed stories from, video games, movies, TV. I think I could probably write a book or something. So sat down, wrote it, and the rest is history. Just kept on doing it.
Nice. I like it. How many books do you have out right now? I think I counted four.
Yeah, I have four published, and I have three written that I just haven't put out.
That's me, except for all of mine are not out.
It's a process, brother.
Yeah. So, are they all in this kind of horror genre? And I think you pegged yourself as a psychological horror author.
Yeah, so definitely the first two are hugely psychological horror. The third one I put out, Roadkill Blues, is just straight crime because I'm a guy. I love a good gangster movie. You know, all the way back from film noir, all the way up to Tarantino, The Departed, Scarface. Love a good gangster flick. So the one I put out, Roadkill Blues, straight up crime. And then New Year's Killing Eve, the one I just put out, it combines that crime element with the horror element. So you have a team of career criminals going to rob this pharmaceutical CEO on his New Year's Eve party. But when they get there, all the guests are dead, and the CEO has lost his mind. And then what happens is those guests that are dead rise back up as zombies, and they have to not only get out with their lives, but hopefully get a little bit of that score too.
Where'd you come up with the idea for this one?
The New Year's Eve one, I had the idea. I always thought if I'm gonna make it, the sign that I've made it big is if I host a New Year's Eve celebration, like Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. I'm like, I want to do that before I die. That's how I know I've made it. um, but after that, it was just the idea of I want to write a heist where a team of career criminals rob a rich guy at his New Year's Eve party. And then once I started thinking about it more and more and more, I'm like, well, what about zombies? What about a lady that turns into a giant spider monster? What about a crazy CEO? So it just kind of grew from there. But really, the starting point was criminals rob a rich guy at his New Year's party.
Okay. So, I'm capturing, notes of crime and notes of horror. How does the psychological part come into that?
Oh, absolutely. So whenever I write, I'm a traditional guy. I don't talk about my feelings, do any of that shit. So to try to not have an aneurysm at Denny's by age 40, I write as my form of therapy. So everything I've gone through in life, I can examine when I'm writing it down. And when I'm doing that, I'm going through my own head, figuring the stuff out. So if I'm going through my head and figuring this out, I can put it on the page as what's going through these characters' minds. So a lot of like April Awakening, Devils in the Night, my first two were really what was going on with these people and how they're dealing with it. So, for example, in April Awakening, it's about two broken people. They're lost in the woods, and you come to find out the reason they're there is to come face to face with their demons, realize their past traumas, and really move on for that. But I can portray it in this light where there's these ghost things roaming around the woods. There's ghost cars and creepy hands in the water and stuff. So I can take what these characters are going through and really put it in physical form with that horror element because I always say there's nothing scarier than what goes on inside our own minds. So if you can bring that to life, I feel like that's a much better demonstration of horror than just a killer chasing some people through the woods.
And this is a question that I often ask to like fantasy authors, which is like along the lines of your magic system or something like that. But I've never really asked it to a horror person before, so you're my first. Do you ever like explain how these horrible things happen, or is the magic kind of something that goes unexplained and like you said, hands in the wood and stuff like that? Like if there's a ghost, do you kind of go into that, or like walk me through your process of the fantastic things in your horror?
Sure. So it kind of depends on the book. So, like April Awakening, we were talking about those ghost things in the woods. Well, at the end, they turn out to be these angelic beings that were there to assist the female character because she had died and they were trying to help her realize that. So, that one, I feel like I fully explained the horror to it, all the symbolism behind it, without necessarily hammering it down your throat as far as this means this and this means that. I feel like I did a good job of subtly explaining all that. But then you have something like Devils in the Night. Devils in the Night is where this guy's working this shitty office job. He has this miserable wife, and he gets moved to the night shift. So he meets this dark goddess demon lady who makes all of his wildest sex fantasies, parties, murder come true. And with her, it's pretty interesting because with her, in my initial draft of the book, I had the opening and the closing from her perspective, and that kind of solidifies that she is in fact, this dark goddess or vampire, ghost, whatever. But I decided to cut those out because if you take those out, it's almost like, did this woman actually exist, or was this all in this guy's head? He was searching for any kind of escape from his life, and he conjured up this demon lady. So I wanted to leave that more ambiguous in that one. So it really depends on the book. 9 times out of 10, I like to leave it open to interpretation, but I feel like sometimes it calls for it, and you have to explain some things so the audience doesn't just say, "What the hell did I just read?"
Yeah, absolutely. So I've talked with some people before, and they're talking about like their inspiration for their writing. And one guy who was a horror guy, and he's like, "Man, I love like reading Goosebumps growing up." So what would you say are some of your inspirations in your books, and like how does your style and tone come through in those books to make it unique?
Yeah, so some of the biggest horror inspirations, I mean, from the time I was little, whenever my dad had the TV on, we were just watching whatever he was watching. And a lot of times he had on Halloween or Friday the 13th. And I can remember seeing those movies and just being so traumatized as a kid. Like in Halloween, I think Laurie Strode opens the cabinet and she sees her dead friend there with her tits out and she's all strangled. I'm just like, oh my God, I should not be seeing this as a 5-year-old. Um, but then a little later on, the Resident Evil. Yeah, right. But then a little later on, we had the Resident Evil games. Later in life, I finally played the Silent Hill games and just those different takes on it. Especially Silent Hill, man. Silent Hill 2, I never played that when it came out, but I don't know how I got down this rabbit hole a couple years ago, but I started seeing all these different analysis videos of Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2, greatest horror game ever made. So I watched all these things. I went back and played it. I'm like, yeah, that's a really good horror game. There's a lot more to it than just, whoa, scary monsters. It's very deep, very introspective, very psychological. So when I wrote my initial books, that was fresh in my mind. I was like, I want to do something along this vein that's a little bit more than just solid horror. And I think that plays into what makes mine unique. I've had people read my work and say, there's definitely an overriding theme of horror, but when you dig into it, it could almost be more of a dark psychological drama or maybe a dark fantasy or something along those lines. And that's not to say like, oh, I think I'm better than horror or anything like that. But I think it's cool that people pick up on that because when I am writing, I am drawing from this wide array of inspirations. Everything I've seen on TV to my legit real life personal experiences. So it's not just straight horror. There is a lot that goes into these stories I try to tell, and that's one of the biggest compliments I can get is when people see it as more than just a straight horror book. Hey, there's a lot more to this than X, Y, and Z.
So you just made brief mention to personal experiences. Would you say that you are a believer in the paranormal, and what kinds of things have you experienced that kind of like come out in your writing?
Yeah, I've never really had too many crazy things happen, but I'll tell you, when I started writing, some weird stuff happened. So when I was writing in 2020 during the pandemic, I think I was working on my first one, April, and every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would hear like 3 knocks on my door. And the way my chair was positioned, I could look out and see if there was some hoodlum out there, playing doorbell bitch with me. So every day for a week, I'd hear these knocks at my door, look out my window on my porch, and there's no one there, and no one's that fast to just knock and disappear. So that was weird. And then during that time, I started having these dreams where I was in my house, but I'd be opening these doors and they'd lead to mansions and just huge other rooms. And when I looked it up on Google, which is a reliable source, of course, it said whenever you have dreams of finding different rooms and different discoveries, it means your brain is almost preparing you for the next phase of your life or a bigger part to your life. And I thought it was weird that this weird stuff was happening around the time I began writing because it's like, maybe there's something to this. And yeah, and other than that, like paranormal stuff. When I was a kid, if I slept with a fan on, I could always hear like a radio broadcast in my ear, but it was always really faint and really far away, and it would always freak me out. So we never had air conditioning growing up, so I would not sleep with a fan on for the longest time. And man, did it get hot in there! But I didn't want to hear that weird radio broadcast in my ear. It's just ugh. Um, And then one other thing too. This is really like the women in my family for some reason. When I was younger, a lot of my relatives were older, like 70s, 80s, whatever. So a lot of them would die throughout my childhood. Fun story, right? Um, but every time, I think it was when my great grandma died, my sister and my mom were in my grandma's garage cleaning stuff or whatever, and they could hear this Christmas song playing. And it was right after our great grandma died. Well, then my grandfather dies a couple years later. Same deal. They're in my grandma's basement, and they hear this same Christmas song playing again. And keep in mind, these people died in the summer, so it's like there's no radio on, there's no Christmas decorations around. Why are they only hearing this at my grandma's house after somebody close to us died? It's weird. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, lots of unanswered questions. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that's kind of what makes books that leave unanswered questions so entertaining, is because we have so many unanswered questions in our own lives that we're like, how the heck did that happen? So going back to what you were saying earlier about video games, I'm kind of a pussy when it comes to scary stuff. Like I've seen a few scary movies. I've seen like, The Ring and Ring 2 and like The Skeleton Key and like the upper, like I could probably name all the scary movies I've ever seen because I hate them. And I've played a couple video games that are horror games. I have an HTC Vive, which is like a VR headset, and there's actually a horror game on there called Duck Hunt, or excuse me, Duck Season. Wait,
Mm.
what's the video? What's like the game from the '80s? Is that Duck Hunt or Duck Season?
Duck Hunt's the one from the 80s. Yeah.
Okay, so this one's called Duck Season, and it's like a play off of that. You ever played this game?
I've seen it. I watch a lot of stuff on video games, so I have seen it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not like overtly terrifying, but I was playing it, and don't forget you have like a headset on, and it's like very realistic. If you not like incredibly realistic, but it draws you into the world. And there's just creepy shit going on, and you're like, oh my god, like I didn't sleep that night just from this one like video game that I played. So I don't have a ton of experience in horror stuff, but my question to you is, when you're writing, are you trying to really scare the bejeebers out of people and keep them up at night through your psychological methods, whatever those crazy things are? Or are you trying to just tell a good story that has like horror elements to it?
Yeah, I'm definitely going for the latter of that, trying to tell a good story with psychological horror elements. In the media I consume, jump scares never really scare me. They just annoy me. Like if I see a movie with a ton of jump scares, I'm like, you didn't scare me. It just got loud and annoying for no reason. Um, but yeah, I always say I try to more so unsettle people than overtly scare them. Because I know when I consume media, if I'm unsettled, like that sticks with me. If I read a book and it really creeps me out but isn't necessarily scary, that sticks with me. It doesn't have to be a horror book. Like I've read Hemingway books that have just deep, terrible endings, and those are the ones that really stick with me. And there's no ghosts popping out scaring you. It's makes you think is what I'm trying to say. If you can make a good story that makes somebody think and have those psychological horror elements along the way that can unsettle them at the same time, I feel like that's boom, really where those two collide.
Okay, awesome. So, changing direction a little bit, going towards your career. You mentioned you have a few books out and you've been doing this for 5 years. You didn't really expect to be doing this. Um, are you self published or traditionally published?
Yep, so I'm self-published.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, you want me to start at the beginning when I decided
Might as
to?
well. Yeah.
All right. So, like I was saying, 2018, I just randomly start writing. I had it in my head I'm going to go the traditional publishing route. I didn't even really know anything about self-publishing. So that first novel I wrote, I sent that out to probably no less than 100 agents, and all of them rejected it. I I got back some nice words like, "Hey, it was well written, just not for me. It was a good story, but whatever." Basically, it was a nice way of saying thank you, fuck you, bye. Um, but after that, you kind of come to this crossroads. Like, okay, I spent a year doing this. I can either say, "Fuck it, it didn't work. Why am I doing this?" Or I can go down this road and say, "Well, that one didn't work, but I wrote a book. I can write another one." So then I wrote another novel, full length, and I'm like, I wrote this, but I'm not really feeling it. I don't think it's that good. So I didn't have too much confidence in that one. So whip that one away. So then with my third one, I was just like, I'm not going to worry about the word count because I was so obsessed with that. I'm not going to worry about the word count. It's going to be as long as it needs to be. I'm not going to worry about what's in style. I'm not going to worry about trying to get an agent. I'm not going to worry about following all the tropes and this has to happen here and that has to happen there. It's going to write the fucking story, send it out somehow, just so I have something out there. Because I said I was going to do this, and I'm a psychopath. When I get something in my head and I say I'm going to do it, I need to do it, or I'll drive myself insane. So with April Awakening, that was the first one I published, man. I wrote it. I was like, I don't give a shit if anybody picks this up or whatever. I didn't even try to send that one out. I discovered self publishing, and I love doing it that way because everything I do, I just want to do on my own. If I make it or I fail, hey, that's all on me. I can't look at Joe Blow over there and be like, hey, Vinny, I failed because of you. Like, no. I wrote this stuff. I published this stuff. I marketed this stuff. So if people latch onto it, hey, that's all me. If people say, wow, that was the worst thing I ever read, that's all on me. And I love doing stuff that way. And in my personal life, in my other careers, in this career, I want it to all be, I kind of want to guide my own destiny, is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what you're talking about, taking responsibility for your own actions and the outcome of it, I think is really important. I think a lot of people, they're afraid to write the book because of failure, or they just keep it on their computer because they're afraid of failure. But you're right, you just need to get it out there, and if it sucks, then it sucks, and just do better next time. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing art just for art's sake.
And I'll tell you what, along those lines, I've known people who are talented musicians, talented writers. I knew this one girl when I worked in corporate. I think she was one of our editors. She would work on our press releases, help us get those looking good. Man, she had a degree in creative writing. She was a fantastic writer. So when I started doing all this, I was talking to her like, man, do you have any tips? You must have all this stuff published. And she said, no, I don't have anything published because I would be terrified to put my stuff out there. And that really sucks because she has a lot of talent, but so many people, like you were saying, are afraid of failing or afraid somebody won't like it. And you just got to stop thinking that way. If you want to do anything creatively and put it out there on your own, you have to stop giving a shit what people think. Because if you do that, you're going to be your own worst enemy and you'll never put anything out, unfortunately. So you really got to believe in yourself, is really at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you do this full time, or is this a side gig for you?
Oh, God, no. I wish I could do it full time. Uh, this is a total side gig. I have two other jobs. Like I said, I'm a personal trainer, working private security. I do this stuff when I have time. I should do it more, but I try to promote myself every day. But as far as sitting down and writing goes, I don't do that every day, and I'm very
Mhm.
regimented and very disciplined, and I know I should. I just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to take your own advice, just do it.
Absolutely right.
So you mentioned being particular about your word count. What were you trying to hit, and like what on average are your book word counts?
Oh yeah, I was driving myself crazy. When you do this stuff or anything really, if you do too much research and you do too much digging, you're gonna go in circles and just drive yourself fucking insane. So I was so obsessed with word count. I was writing my first novel, and I read somewhere a novel is 40,000 words. So I'm like, okay, I got to get this to 40,000. I got to get this to 40,000, and I got it to 40,000, and I was like, cool, this should be good to go. I like where it's at. Let's do this. And then I read something else that said, well, if you want a novel that's going to sell, it needs to be 80,000. So then I go back and I'm like, oh no, I got to make it 80,000. So now I'm just shoehorning a bunch of bullshit that doesn't even need to be there just to try to get this thing up to 80,000. And it's just all nonsense. And I did that. I feel like I almost ruined the book by doing that because now there's too much. The second one I wrote, same deal. I was so obsessed with trying to get it to 80,000 words that there's so much going on in there, and I don't think any of it makes sense. So I was just real obsessed with that and trying to really do things by the book. And then that's so weird for me because 9 times out of 10, like my family always says, like Roy doesn't give a shit. So I'm like, why am I giving a shit about all this just arbitrary bullshit that somebody made up? Why don't I just write stories I want to write and fuck it, they're going to be as long as they need to be, and I'll like them, and if other people like them, great. But I'm not going to sit here and worry about all this nitpicky nonsense.
Yeah. I think ultimately it comes down to, are you creating it for other people or yourself, kind of like you said. And obviously, like we want other people to read our stuff and be like, oh man, like this stuff is great. I want to read and tell all my friends about it. Everybody wants that. But at the same time, like you're kind of selling out to the man if you're like, I need to hit a certain word count, or I need to write in a certain genre, or I need to have a certain character that does a certain thing. Like, no, just write your own art the way that your truth speaks to you, and you'll find your tribe. And people who like it will like it, and the people that don't, well, they can fuck off.
Right? And that was one of the biggest things I had to learn, because when I started doing this, I got an editor for my first novel, and he gave me all these great suggestions. It was awesome. I'm sure if I had put them to paper, it would have sold. But about a quarter of the way through making these edits, I'm just like, this isn't the story I want to tell anymore. So this isn't enjoyable. If I wanted a boss and somebody telling me what to write and do this and do that, I would go get another day job. Like, I do this because it's something I like to do. And like you were saying, and I come from like a big music background, so I mean, a lot of the bands who like got huge or got signed, like Motley Crue, Metallica, these guys, they were all putting out music that they liked, that they were passionate about. It was true, it was real, and people latched onto that, and then the success came. But it started with them doing what they wanted to do for themselves. And I always say, if you like what I do, awesome, I got love for you. If not, the shit's so subjective, you can't expect everybody to like everything that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I got one final question for you before I let you go, which is, when is season 2 of Life with Death coming out?
Oh man, I can't believe you watched that one. It's in the works. I'm working with a guy. He wanted to collaborate with me on it. I was just gonna do a one and done for something to do, and then he hit me up. He's like, "Nah, man, you have to do a second season. I'll be in on it. I'll do all this stuff." So I recorded the initial episode on my end and sent it off to him. So once he gets to work on it, man, we'll be off and rolling.
All right. Well, if you want to collab and I'll help you write it or something, happy to help you out. I
Right
love the
on, bro.
vision. I love the humor. I love the laugh tracks. I think if people don't like laugh tracks, they suck.
Right. Where's the freeze frame?
Yeah. All right, sir. Anything else before I let you go?
Nah, man, just thanks for having me on. If anybody wants to check me out, my Instagram is author_Honeybrook. I do everything on there. That's where you can find my books, message me, say hi, whatever you want. I'm there.
All right, everybody. Sexy Boy Roy.